Please hold whilst we connect you to Redacted.
This is Fraser Greenfield.
Hi, this is Louis Mills.
And this is Amber Case. And you're listening to Redacted.
Amber Case is an internationally recognized cyborg anthropologist, consultant, design advocate, and author of 4 books, including Calm Technology and Designing with Sound. She spent 2 years as a fellow at MIT's Center for Civic Media and Harvard's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. But you might know her best for a TED Talk, We Are All Cyborgs Now. A few of her accolades include being named one of Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30 and Fast Company's most influential women in technology. Amber was the co-founder of Geoloki, a location-based software company acquired by Esri. Amber is currently research director at the Meta Governance Project, where she runs the Department of Calm Technology and is incubating a standards body based on the principles of calm tech.
Pleased to meet you, Amber. For our guests, do you mind maybe introducing yourself?
Yes, my name is Amber Case, and I care deeply about how things are designed and the discrepancy between how we design technology and how we designed tools for most of human history.
Fantastic. So one thing that you touched on there is the ARM technology. Do you mind sort of getting into that a little bit more? So where does it come from and why it's necessary to design?
Sure. So when we think about technology, I think there's this constant idea that it needs to be disruptive and loud and in your face. We get a lot of ideas about technology from cool blue screens of interactive stuff in movies. We have a Minority Report, we have Terminator, we have RoboCop. It's all about enhancing technology. It's very exciting. It's got to be speaking in some disembodied woman's voice. It's got to help you with your life. Oh no, it's going to kill us. Oh no, it's going to take away our lives. And now it's disruption as it's destroying the youth. Okay, cool. But we overlook a lot of the stuff in our life, like a vacuum cleaner, a light switch, your glasses that you wear, the window. We don't notice the window when we look through it. We just notice the outside. We don't notice our glasses if they're well designed. We look through them. And these are pass-through technologies. There's just as much technology in a good pair of running shoes than there is in like some of the weird pieces of technology that we're like attracted to because of an ad. But when we use them, they support us, and we're able to actually interact with the world through them as an extension of ourselves. And so this becomes this big tension of, hey, where's the technology and the design methods for making stuff that works alongside us instead of against us? Stuff that dissolves, and by dissolve and become invisible doesn't mean it's doing stuff on our behalf without us knowing about it. It means that it's a pass-through, that we focus on the task and not the tool. So when you use a hammer, you focus on the nail, your task, not the hammer. It becomes an extension of yourself. Now, we don't have a good framework, a set of principles, and a set of designs for that kind of understanding of technology. We just have a lot of really cool science fiction articles blasting us with the idea that it should be really exciting. But just the same as we want to just turn on like a video streaming platform and not worry about installing the latest update, we also just want to live in our house and not have to be a system administrator in our own home. So for me, I was really concerned when I was a kid about the encroaching chaos that technology was bringing. And also my dad was an inventor, so I was not a stranger to all the new stuff. But I also got all of his hand-me-downs of stuff that he was trying out that didn't work. Like a voice-activated light that if I turned the sensitivity down and a truck drove by at night and I was reading a book, it would turn the light on or off, like when I was trying to sleep. Or I had to yell at it if I was playing music because the music would trigger the light to turn off. And so there was all these like little edge cases that I started to collect, that it wasn't just here's a thing that's going to do something for you. The divide was between what good engineers are taught in terms of resiliency, redundancy, ethics, and then what we call software engineers, which is let's just get it done because we have a VC breathing down our neck, making sure that we can make the return on investment that they're required to get because they're managing a fund for wealthy people. So there's this big tension as well in CEOs of companies saying, I read this in Popular Science, I read this in MIT Tech Review, we need to catch up without understanding the fundamentals. So I really wanted to know who's come up with these ideas. Has anyone? And it was really upsetting because I didn't think anyone cared. And in college, when I was writing my thesis on mobile phones, specifically the iPhone when it came out in 2007, one of the first people to really research this, I found that a group of researchers at Xerox PARC in Palo Alto had come up with this idea in the late 80s and 90s that in the future, technology would no longer be a scarce resource. It would be very cheap. And the most expensive resource we had would be attention. And if technology, how it worked with our attention, that our scarce resource would be attention. And so we needed to make things that worked well with that. And they wrote this beautiful short essay called The Coming Age of Calm Technology. And they outlined what were a kind of framework of a couple principles. When I read that, I cried because I thought, this is it, I have to meet them. And then 2 of the 3 founders had already passed away, very young. And I thought I need to carry on their legacy. Mark Weiser, notably, died at age 46 and was about to write a book on this. I just learned this because there's a biography that just came out on him. So for me, it was, here is this clear path. Here is the person who helped create ubiquitous computing and understanding that the number of devices in the world would outnumber the number of people in the world. And at that point, that relationship of that technology to us was the most important thing to design. People hadn't thought about that, and he thought about this in the mid-90s, way before we got ubiquitous computing, Internet of Things, and any of the trials and tribulations that we have with what Freud called in his Civilization and Discontents, an over-proximity of all things. So I got really obsessed with this. I decided to wait because I thought everyone knew about this. A few people were ardent supporters, but it was not really, the torch wasn't totally carried on. John Seeley Brown's another person who did put this into play. But I waited and I couldn't handle it anymore. So I wrote a book proposal to O'Reilly saying, I want a book on calm tech, not cyborg anthropology, calm technology. This is more important. This is a better application. This is what I need to do. And I revised it and made 8 principles of calm technology.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you mind getting into some of those principles as well?
Sure. There are 8 principles of calm technology. The first one is that technology shouldn't require all of our attention, just some of it, and only when necessary. The second principle is that technology should inform and calm. The third principle is that technology should empower our peripheral attention. The fourth principle is that technology should amplify the best of technology and the best of humanity. Machines shouldn't act like humans, and humans shouldn't act like machines. The fifth principle is that technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak. The sixth principle is that technology should work even when it fails. The seventh principle is that the right amount of technology is the minimum amount to solve the problem. And the eighth principle is that technology should respect social norms. So the first principle is that technology should require the smallest amount of attention and only when necessary. So when you're trying to watch a show on a Roku player or whatever you've got, and it says, we can't play your show, you need to download the latest software update. That is not requiring the smallest amount of attention. That's requiring all of your attention, and it's not necessary because what you can do is say, before you turn off the device, it can say, hey, we're going to download this thing for you. Do you want us to update this for you and then shut it off for you? And you can say, yes, I want you to do that in the background. Thank you very much. Or you can say, no. But that's a much better way of appreciating somebody's limited attention. Again, we don't want to have to be a system administrator in our own home unless we want to do that. A much better analogy is probably just a car. When you're driving in a car, you're paying your full primary attention in front of you, your full eyesight resolution to the road. Everything else in that car is a supportive architecture meant to involve your peripheral attention. That window itself is a pass-through, all of these other things, the rear view mirror, the side mirrors, the wing mirrors, these buttons and knobs, even the foot pedal is about taking your primary focus and putting it on the road. And we do not design the desktop computer in the same way that we designed the car. And that was the big issue that Mark Weiser had in a beautiful paper he wrote called The World is Not a Desktop, which said, we keep designing technology as if we can pay full attention in front of us to the technology. But in the future, it's going to be in our environment, and it needs to be just like nature. You can tell the time because you can see through the window where the sun is. You can see what's going on a hot stove if there's a little indicator light that tells you it's hot. And so that requiring the smallest amount of attention is important. How do you do that? Principle 2 is make use of people's peripheral attention. It turns out that we've evolved so much understanding of the periphery, because if you're in a forest or a plane, you can hear what's going on. You can hear behind you, you have a sense of touch, you have feet, you can press buttons with them, pedals. There's all sorts of things you can do, and yet we've restricted ourselves to this little tiny ocular space in front of us. And that is really reducing our ability to make rich, contextual, and interesting experiences. Now, one thing that makes really good use of peripheral attention is an airplane. If you are an airline pilot, you have all sorts of complex, insane-looking interfaces, but if you're a pilot, it makes you actually calm because you have attuned to the information space, you have context, and only when something needs your attention does it light up, and it's not lighting up in this like crazy blue glow Minority Report insanity. It's just like a very small, like amber colored light that says, hey, look at me. And so what the things are, you have that information in your environment. And I think one of the cooler Mark Weiser quotes was, there's just as much information in a forest as there is a busy city. One of them calms us down, and the other one makes us a little bit anxious, paraphrasing here. Why? And what's the difference? So there's a lot of information in these spaces, but to think about number 3, like Calmtech principle number 3 is function as a pass-through. And this is about that window. Even an inner office window still can give you privacy if it's oriented at the top of a door, but it's letting you see whether somebody's inside that or not. There's a couple more, there's 8 principles. So like there's communicate a variety of messages through a variety of senses, but you don't need to speak. Technology can communicate, but it doesn't need to speak a human voice all of the time unless it's necessary. So all of these devices that are speaking in a really long verbal sense, we expect to interact with them at the same resolution. And actually, they're not human. So it's a mess. 5 is to amplify the best of technology and the best of humanity. Don't try to make tech do something that humans are better at. Or, like a phone tree, humans will end up on pause. When people are having a hard time, you need to have a human on the other side of the phone to help them out. It actually ends up being cheaper in some cases. In Japan, there's a lot of examples of someone trying to figure out a train station ticket, it being really, really hard for them, and then a person will literally come out of the wall to help them use a machine. We're knowing that person, that train station attendant, is actually the expert at using that system, and they know that someone's panicking, they can help them out. So that's kind of an extension of omotenashi, which is this idea of Japanese service, like knowing what someone's going to need. It doesn't always have to be automated. The question is, what's good to automate, what not, and how do you make technology that's alongside instead of assistive or artificial, just like we had with our OG tools. Number 6, make sure that a technology works even when it fails. This is the resiliency from engineering that I'm trying to bring into the general expectation of how we should use something. When an escalator breaks, it turns into stairs. It's pretty good. when you're streaming on YouTube and it's not very good in terms of connection, the audio doesn't get degraded, but the video gets degraded because the audio is much more interruptive to your attention to degrade. Number 7 is to leverage familiar behaviors to introduce new ones, which is like use the play button where you can, even if you're doing it digitally, so people aren't super confused by a new interface. If you want to introduce something, you need to introduce it in kind of a digestible way. What does that mean? It's not that technology isn't ready for us. It's usually that we're not ready for the technology. And in this case, there's the story of elevator operators that when elevators came out, they had to be operated by elevator operators. And then it wasn't until the elevator operators went on strike that people realized that they could just push the buttons themselves. It was this digestion that it took for people to understand.
They went on strike. That's a bit of a self-goal.
Right? So, and then number 8 is communicate culture and create harmony through material choices. And this is a newer one. So these are shifting a bit as they test them out. These have been adopted by a lot of companies around the world, and there's like numerous products now that use these principles. But one of the things that really annoyed me is like going into a beautiful art museum and everything is from a specific era. And then you have a giant HVAC system, heating and air conditioning system that goes like this huge, awful ventilation sound. And okay, yeah, we need to keep the museum cool. But hey, you and your architects designed this whole room, and yet you didn't design the HVAC system. Well, what can you do? I was really inspired by this James Turrell house up in the rural part of Japan outside of Niigata. The idea of it is that, yes, there's an HVAC air conditioning heating system in the house, but it's receded into the background and there's a beautiful decorative wooden grate over it. And so the air seems to come out of nowhere and it's hidden enough, and there's kind of some acoustic padding that you don't hear this thing. You don't hear the house breathing in this like really raspy way that a lot of like giant gymnasiums breathe. And if you're trying to make an environment of respect or agelessness or beauty, you don't want somebody taken out of that story of the museum or your art exhibit or just your everyday life with this crazy sound. And so this idea of you can create more harmony by just kind of softening those gradients between here and there. And if you can do that, you end up with a kind of quiet elegance in which things work, but they don't draw attention to themselves. But also, if you need to service that, you can take out the grate and you can get to it. It's not like trying to do everything for you or be perfect. It's just calming it down a little bit so that your senses aren't attacked when you're trying to focus on another task like the art.
Redacted.
Hey everyone, this episode is sponsored by PCBWay, the go-to destination for printed circuit board prototyping, low-volume production, and PCB assembly. If your team is working on electronics and you're in need of prototype PCBs, I can't recommend PCBWay enough. You can get a quote instantly, even if your circuit board schematics aren't finished yet. They can also help you with injection molded, 3D printed, sheet metal, and vacuum cast prototypes. PCBWay is the circuit board prototyper of choice for companies like Samsung, Siemens, Honeywell, Tesla, and Apple. But you don't have to be a big company to use their services. I've personally used their service to instantly get quotes and have assembled PCB prototypes delivered right to my door in a timely manner. On top of all that, PCBWay is so excited to be working with us, they're offering a special discount just for our listeners. When you get a quote from PCBWay, be sure to use our promo code REDACTED for a special discount on us. You can find PCBWay in our episode description or go to pcbway.com.
Redacted.
So, how would a Tamagotchi or TikTok fit in with these principles, and what would need to be changed in order for it to conform?
When we think about apps or experiences like Tamagotchis or TikTok, it's really that it's not like we need to calm these experiences down. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So, for instance, a Tamagotchi is something that people bond to because it's this little creature in your pocket on an old school plastic egg that you have to feed. And because you're feeding it, because it needs your help to survive, you bond to it. And so actually, that could be a bit of a calming experience. But it is a kind of social design technology. Let's say we want to take the principle of the Tamagotchi and make it really useful for society. It's pretty straightforward, and it's also a little bit hilarious. In Japan, there are these robotic seals. They're stuffed animal seals called Pero, and they're for people with dementia. So they are in old folks' homes, and because the people with dementia have to care for this robotic seal because it needs to be pet and needs to be fed with this little pacifier, the people with dementia stop having as many episodes because there's this thing that's soft that they can pet that needs them. And so that is kind of a calming technology in terms of a social technology. It's a pretty interesting notion to say, how do we design things that people will feel better around or will distract them or preoccupy them? We can use people's attention in a really good way. There's another example, I forgot where it was, but there was this idea of an elderly care home, people with dementia, everyone was escaping, and they would try to get out in the middle of the night, and people would have to go and find them, and it was awful. So what they did is they installed a bus stop, a fake bus stop to which no bus ever came. And what this meant, people would go to the bus stop, they would wait for the bus wouldn't come, but a therapist could come and talk with them until the episode was over. Where are you going? I'm going back home. Oh, great. Well, we'll just sit and wait for the bus together. Yep. And so with TikTok, we're kind of thinking about Marshall McLuhan, the media scholars, like hot and cool media. You actually, in entertainment, might want to watch a movie with a lot of exciting explosions, but you want to have your dishwasher in the background be quiet enough that you can hear the movie. So you need a calm technology on one hand so that you can pay attention to the exciting technology in front of you that's displaying and giving you a pass-through experience. So with TikTok, it's almost like the interface is so quiet in the background that you don't even notice it, and you just swap through all of those videos. And it becomes kind of an unending sentence. With apps that are designed to be pass-throughs and are super addicting, kind of like run-on sentences, I use an app called OneSec. OneSec allows you to use your shortcuts in Apple to open up OneSec when you're trying to open up an app like Instagram or Twitter or TikTok. And what it will do is take over your screen and vibrate your phone and tell you to take a deep breath. And if you set it about 10 seconds, you notice how many times that you've tried to click on this app just out of habit. And it gives you a visualization of it stopped 6,000 attempts at opening Instagram for me since February, for instance. I just looked at the stats today.
Wow.
It has saved...
I think I need that.
Yes. It has saved a cumulative 6.2 days of my life.
That's insane.
Sounds like you need to read some like meditations.
Well, I think we'd be surprised how often we would have to, how much time we'd all save. So that's crazy.
Yeah. The hard thing is that, yes, of course, I need to do meditations. But do I remember that the meditation app exists when I'm doom scrolling? No, I don't.
I was thinking more of the book by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, nice. Well, if I remembered that a book existed, that would be great. The problem is when you're in these doom scrolls, it's just so exciting. I call it like the endless feast, or like that cornucopia that never ended, that people just feasted on forever. Like some of these ancient, Greek stories of don't go to that island. The siren call.
The lotus eaters live there.
Yeah.
The sirens bring you in.
Yeah.
Or the lotus eaters. Yeah.
Yeah. What is TikTok but a lot of sirens with cool dance moves?
Pretty much.
Or very, very cute cats.
Those are also sirens with cool dance moves.
Because we do hear a lot about how certain pieces of technology are destroying the youth the same way ancient Greeks complained about cheap scrolls and books. Do you think there's a big opportunity for calm technology principles to change the landscape of user experience and hardware design? And how do you think it already has changed in the past 10 years?
Yes. I've noticed that more washers and dryers allow you to turn the alarms off. Samsung decided that they were using calm technology as a marketing statement. One of their company's smart things, which I was like, this is calm tech. They ended up buying it. There's a startup called Mui, which takes your home automation system and puts the high tech behind a piece of very thin wood where the light can shine through it. And it's very beautiful and elegant. Microsoft adopted new principles of design influenced by calm tech, and they actually made their latest operating system based on calm tech principles. Google has several departments that implement calm technology. Virgin Global, several car companies I can't disclose, will have a lot more calm tech in them, also working publicly with Jaguar Land Rover. It's kind of an interesting thing because you can get a lot out of the original papers. And if you follow just some of the principles, we're not talking about dramatically changing products. We're not talking about an overhaul. We're just talking about things being marginally better. And it can really change your bottom line. An early example, which wasn't necessarily calm tech, but is definitely calm tech principle, is I think it was the Kitty smoke detector. What they noticed is that when you use a smoke detector, you are very often getting mad at it and taking out the batteries because it's
Definitely.
yeah, and so it's very embarrassing. And they're like, oh, it's about embarrassment, it's not about safety. So what if we make a giant button on our smoke detector that you can hit with the bottom of a broomstick so that you can turn it off when you want to make popcorn late at night and you accidentally burn it because you're stoned? Great. Ding. And so it worked, and I think it's like 80% market share because they understood the social context instead of just the technical context. And they said, in the bedroom, we want a smoke detector that has a much higher sensitivity level, but in the kitchen, we want it a little bit lower so that you can have a little bit of freedom without that like piercing scream that's trying to protect you, but in doing so is annoying you to the point where you turn it off. And so it's really about the understanding of how the device lives alongside you at what time of day, who is using the device, what are they using it for, and what emotional states did they get into when things go wrong, and how do you help them with that, or at least soften the blow of those failures, like burning the popcorn. And so they got it, and they get the market share reward for it. And I think it's really important to note that if you think about simple things that we overlook, like hair dryers, really freaking loud. What if somebody wakes up in the morning, like, let's just think, there's a married couple, one of them needs to blow dry their hair, it wakes up the other person, it's terrible. But when everybody says, oh, a hair dryer, they don't go to conferences on the future of the hair dryer. They don't say, wow, I bet I could disrupt the hair dryer. And they definitely don't look at an object that's in their bathroom and say, wow, this could change. They just say, that's a hair dryer, that's how it's always been, and they just ignore it. They don't even think about it. And so when Dyson said, how could we innovate the hair dryer, or what haven't we innovated? They said, oh, if we just take a spectrum of what this hair dryer sounds like, we can actually make it sound less loud. And in doing so, innovate the hair dryer and a whole line of other products by making the innards of the dryer have components that fit together so well that when you drive a lot of hot air through them, they don't vibrate and rattle in a way that causes unnecessary noise. It was an amazing innovation. On that front, the BlendTech blender did pretty much the same thing. These little franchises in the States called Jamba Juice were like, we're going to make you a smoothie. And you'd get to the counter in the middle of a mall and you'd be like, I want a smoothie. And they're like, what? Because they couldn't hear you over the sound of these crazy blenders. And so BlendTech came out with an amazing blender that containerized the sound, put it in another container, and then put a rubber base to handle some of the vibration. And now you can talk over the smoothie. They're $1,000 each. Do you think they did well? Yes. This franchise would gladly purchase all BlendTech blenders for $1,000 each because they're providing what the customer needs and the employee needs, which is to be able to still blend stuff without extremely expensive acoustic protection and be able to like just get their job done. So this is like the methodology is something that I'm working on being a lot more like verbose and a lot more like frameworks and help, because I've noticed that there are a bunch of companies adopting this, which is great, but some of them are adopting it either as a marketing statement and they're not really doing it well. And I think for some of the examples, like I've always bugged the same company. I use them as an example every time. Petnet.io, which is now defunct, they had a connected pet feeder app, a physical object that had a web connection. And the feeding regimen was connected to a remote server. And everybody started relying on this app for their pet feeding. And then the remote connection failed. And that server went down and the pet starved.
Oh, wow.
This really set me off onto the idea of how do I get bad actors like that to care and to have a checklist that they go through before they release something that's life or death for living beings. I would not want my cat or dog to have that. And there's no box, but the website was like, don't worry about feeding water in your pet again. We have it handled for you. What does that mean? An engineer would really faint thinking about that. There's no redundancy. But a startup person would be like, oh, this is no big deal. So I tweeted at them on Twitter and they said, oh yeah, that was on our roadmap to have a backup system.
When they could have just put a very simple memory system inside the actual hardware device itself.
Yeah.
That it would back up to lost connection.
Well, something like that. It should be top of the list on the like FMEA sort of stuff. Like the failure mode is insane, like death of all animals that have used this thing.
The amount of engineering consultants I met who don't know what a PFMEA is.
Well, actually, that's an important point. Can you explain briefly what that is? Because people who are listening to this who don't know it, this is a cool thing to know, and it's exciting, and it can reduce so many conversations that you have with your team.
You're listening to Redacted. To stay up to date with the show and see what else we've got going on, be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at redacted_design_pod. Subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends. Cheers.
So a PFMEA it's a process failure mode and effects analysis. It's basically just a very fancy way of documenting how a system can, does, and should fail, and then what actions you've either already implemented to mitigate that or should implement in the future.
Great.
And it's done that way so that you can have a controlled process. I mean, I've definitely worked in situations where we've had a team who knew what they were doing, who had this document, and then of course we were brought on as an auxiliary to the existing team, and we would document every single failure. We'd implement a fix, and of course the original team members didn't ever reference this document and would implement a fix to a problem that we had already fixed. And in doing so, they'd overcompensated and another thing would break as a result. There's also some legal implications as well for people listening in. Keeping this document is very important because if you have, let's say, a pet feeder that doesn't work and results in injury or death, the company can be liable to compensate the consumer. And having this document is often referenced as to whether you did your due diligence and whether or not you are liable for those damages.
Cool. That's a great overview. It's something that, honestly, that and a few other things are why I left the West Coast and Silicon Valley entirely, and I'm now on the East Coast. Not because I don't like the sun and innovation. I mean, I've done several startups and some of them got pretty big, but because when VCs would have me come in or people would introduce me to their startup or people would come up after me running after I did a talk trying to pitch me their latest app, I would ask them, what happens when this fails? What happens when it's in airplane mode? What happens when the remote server goes down? None of them would talk about redundancy, resiliency, or anything. I want to be a little bit closer to where more civil engineers are and more like engineers are, because I think that, and for lack of a better word, the blue collar perspective of having to make something work at a non-abstract level so that there's a direct example of whether something's working or not, and a life or death situation, and the respect of human life and systems and process is much more important than a trust fund kid getting money from a multi-generational wealth fund that has to return some money so that they can sell it. And I don't mean that to be like intensely cynical. It's just that I think that people need real world experience, and they need to be able to make stuff that people need and have a process for understanding what that is, at least reasonably well. And I want to work on real things, and I want to help people out. Now, along the way, I realized that people like Dieter Rams, they have these wonderful sets of principles, and they make furniture that you can have forever, like Lego blocks. We only make it in these colors. Here's a chair, and it turns into a couch. You can swap this out. It's going to cost the same amount, no matter what. It's going to hold its value. It's got great stuff. Okay, great. That's cool. We have Lego. We have Apple that actually took on those Dieter Rams principles and has like calculators and stuff like that like work the same way. And it's really important to note that not that many other companies have really taken on any of these things seriously from an industrial design perspective. So, oh no, there's a gap. Oh no, people need more hand-holding. I think it's my responsibility to try to parse these out and make these beautiful block diagrams and to be able to plug this in and be able to make sense of it. And it's especially important for students who I run a lot of people through Calm Tech workshops, and I love messing with that. Like, okay, all of you are going to make the most annoying device possible, and they all have great time making a terrible toilet with surveillance or like something just horrendous. And then I have them swap projects, and I say, you just inherited this terrible object. Calm it down. I try to make it fun. But fundamentally, at the end, people aren't designing things with a real quiet understanding of like harmony and what calm tech is. And companies are almost getting it. And so it's like, it's just I've seen a lot of Japanese companies get it a lot more because of like just the culture of like collective respect, harmony. It's not perfect roses over there either, but there's a much more deeper deliberance in what people are doing. I think it's important that if we're going to be in a world where right now, the era I call right now the great disposable age, bunch of junk, bunch of plastic, bunch of throwaway objects we touch for a second and they last forever. I don't want to be in the great disposable age anymore. I want a cup that I can hold in my hand that is going to be beautiful as it ages, and I want to be able to know how to build it. There's so many wonderful things we could have, but we aren't going to have the resources in the future to be able to have bad stuff. It's just lame. So we have to remember how to do it. And there's this emaciation of, or like not even anything passed down except for a couple people. So when we ask like, is technology ruining the youth? I think there's just a handful of people in every generation that care about this and think of time 1,000 years or don't think of it as linear, but think of it as cyclical and regenerative. And how can you apply positive influences on this feedback loop system so that there's incentives for people to make better stuff? And you have to really wield economics to be able to do that. If you don't, people are going to be like, cute, standards. I have a lobbyist in Congress and I'm going to fight against your dumb standards because it makes it harder for me to make cheap stuff for people. You asshole, you're taking away jobs. I've seen this happen with lots of lobbyists. Like, they're really good, but it doesn't mean that they're doing a service for anyone, and they have to feed their families too. Like, they're good at what they're doing. So how do you make an economic model for people to say, if you apply these standards, your products will make more money, the world may be a better place, but there's all these conscious consumers out there that are like, I need this, and I don't know where to find it, and I can't search on Google for it because it's a total mess. And so it's important to kind of, for designers, to get the gotchas, like, no, it's not invisible technology, it's passed through. And then also for the conscious consumers to have some findability, like EWG's Skin Deep database is really cool about seeing what's inside stuff. Don't you just want like a context seal of approval that says this will not strand your pet as the pet feeder? Don't you want to say like this will not disrupt you in the car asking for a software update, cause you to almost hit a deer? Like, I mean, there's just like basic stuff that people want out of life. And right now, technology developers are not servicing them. And it can't be done in a way of like, oh, you're doing a bad job. It must be like, we understand it's really hard to make stuff, but there's this cool thing and you can join it. It's going to be great. And you'll get a lot of benefits. So like, you can do it. Like, let's do it together.
I mean, it's a good point to think that like a calm and responsible design process will ensure the value of your product in the long run, as well as being socially responsible, which makes for a good leeway of, let's say you are taking on someone's troubled project. What is your process for identifying whether a product is in dire need of calmification?
I think it's if everything's a mess around it. It's kind of like you can see these products from like a million miles away. It's about the experience of the product. The first thing is what I just call truth versus truthy. Stephen Colbert has that truthy thing where it's like, it looks like it's true, but it's actually truthy, right? Which means I saw the ad on Instagram and it looked like a really sick thing. Like, I'm into this. I'm going to get this. And when you get it and you're like, wow, this thing did not meet my experiential expectation. It looked good two-dimensionally. There was a cool soundtrack that went with it. There was a model that was like chilling with it. It was paid. When I got it, I was like, this is not what I expected. And
it's plastic crap.
Yeah, it's a thing meant to support one of these fast moving, fast fashion enterprises, whatever. And so Calm-Tech is interesting in that it's very hard to make an ad for Calm-Tech. You just can't have someone like be in a meditative pose inside their car. I mean, you can do that to some extent, but it's more about when you get there, you're in someone else's car that's like calm and you're like, wow, I feel good. You don't know exactly why, but you have less road rage and you can actually hear someone when you're in the car during a meeting, or like the little adjustment for the chair is right where you expect it to be. You're getting in a rental car and everything's just there. And they thought it through that you don't have to look how to turn up and down the volume. There's this clarity, there's a sense of calm. It's a lot more than like, oh, I need to meditate. No, it's this sense that this is here because it's been thought through by another human that understands the human experience. That level of detail is a lot to do, but once it's done, it makes classics. It makes multi-generational care. It makes something that people remember. And sometimes it's a sense of awe. And to me, these kind of products that follow these kinds of principles are category shifters. So if you see something that's like a flash in the pan and you know that they're just trying to get something out, it's like, okay, maybe you don't have the time in your life to think through how to do this thing well. And maybe that's okay. But there are some companies with billions of dollars and they still churn out junk. And it's like, it's just like, it's a real missed opportunity. And I think a lot of these companies are in pain and they're having panic attacks at their board meetings because they need to do GPT-3. We'll just say we're AI. It's like, you don't understand the principles or even the idea that the term AI was come up with in 1956 to make sure that the cybernetics guy who took up all the air in the room wouldn't show up at that conference and take it for his own. They just didn't want him to be there. Like, come on, like, look at the history of any of these words. What does it mean? Like, look deeper than like 1 year of panic, like innovation of what looks like it, right? So it's like that truth versus truthy. Like, here is a cool thing, and it's advertised in an ad, and it doesn't work.
So how do you sell this to an executive board or a product manager?
I usually don't do anything. And I think that's a really important thing for me to make as little moves as possible. I will write articles on Medium where I talked about like why the color of technology must change. In ads, technology is blue. We actually need orange for our eyes so that we can see at night and drive. Simple stuff like if you can write like a small piece that gets people to understand just a little bit of a shift. Hilarious the number of car companies that called me over the touchscreen article that I wrote, which just makes fun of giant touchscreens in cars. Right? Like, if you can take something, put some humor to it, then, and I didn't do that to get any gigs, which always wasn't the point. The point was I need to explain how everybody's experiencing the world, but a consumer is kind of like that science fiction character where I have no mouth, but I must scream.
It almost sounds like you need to publish a big authoritative human factors sourced book that you just ship out and say, this is a reference document.
That would be very nice. I think there's 2 reasons why I won't do that. The first reason is that that's not sexy enough for people to care. And a post that gets people to laugh, that's spreadable, like the touchscreens post. I think the Blu-ray post, they each got like 2 million views. They got syndicated by some of them got syndicated by Fast Company. It changed the conversation. People reference that article to me and they don't know I wrote it, which is the success for me, right? Because it means that got dispersed into the zeitgeist of what's going on in a way that was comprehensible. If I produce a human factors book, some people will read it. I did the Comtech book for 130 pages or so. Somebody could read it on a plane flight. An executive could read it, a student could read it, and they could get the conversation going. But then people are asking for more. And if I want to make a good human factors book, it's important to have funding, and it needs to be industrial scale funding because I want to do it right. So what's the best way to do that? Get awesome companies that believe in Comtech to help sponsor the development of these standards for the categories. So right now I'm making a standard of standards, which is how can you tell whether a standard for a vertical is calm so that you can verify those segments, right? So it's like, we have these Comtech things, great, but we're going to do this for AI. We're going to do this for VR. We're going to do this for automotive. Each one is going to require multiple years, multiple experts, and a lot of testing. So you don't want to do them wrong. And not everyone's interested in a general book. Like, that would be great, but it doesn't work. Automotive is different from skyscrapers, which is different from hospitality, which is different from movies. People are going to innovate in that space because it's media. Do we need to have rules around that? No. How about the interfaces to play it on? Sure, but not rules. Guidelines, inspirations. Like, we don't want to have things like so set in stone, but we do want to have at least some guidance for like, oh my gosh, no headset until Apple for augmented reality has come out with user experience basic guidelines for like how to actually build stuff with it. Come on. You're having an entirely new way of interacting with the world that got pioneered by Ivan Sutherland in 1963, and you're calling it new, and no one's ever done like the really good work about being like, hey, when you're in AR or VR, you don't need to do everything for the person. We like books because the villain is not said to us the villain was bad. And that's what VR and AR do. They leave no room for imagination because they tell us everything. It's terrible, right? So like,
oh, so you've got strong opinions about the new Apple product that's come out,
I
the
think
Vision
it's
Pro?
better because it gives you the guidelines with it. It tells you here's the new thing, but we've done research for you. Thank God, right? Like, I think it has a more chance of succeeding because people have guidelines, and I think probably in my work I need to give more guidelines because they're great.
So what would be wrong with the Oculus Quest, the meta version?
There wasn't like a really useful book of helpful guidelines. Like, it took a long time for people to figure out what were people building in, not Unreal Engine, but the other engine.
Unity.
Okay.
So in Unity, that was kind of like a changing, crazy interface. It wasn't like people dealt with Xcode when the iPhone came out. I mean, I made my first app in 2009, right? 2 years after the iPhone came out.
For reference, you're talking about the developer of these programs, not the consumer, right?
Yeah. So for developers, Xcode was what you made your iPhone apps in. Xcode was kind of annoying to use, but at least it had a lot of pretty good stuff from like Apple Next. There was at least some really well thought through systems. And then I would also make VR apps in Unity. And I remember so much of it was just getting it to be stable or reusable enough to just download a simple asset from somewhere and then like make a scene. And I remember like the insane overhead and being like, why aren't we building VR apps inside of VR? Like, you're inside VR. You can press a button on your head that makes a palette of primitives that you can stick together, and then you can change colors with your fingertips. Like, and the only app that did that was Anyland, which is an amazing app for VR for the HTC Vive, it allowed you to make stuff from within it and actually program it inside. So you didn't have to compile. You just had your own universe. You'd go in, make your own body, raise the sun by pulling it up with your hand to light your environment, and you could teleport to other people's worlds where they had built insane stuff. If you like something in their environment, you'd click on it, clone it, add it to your palette. You'd have like 20 pages of cool stuff, and then you could take it right off the palette that you had in your hand, like a little cookie sheet, and it would be big again, and you just throw it into your environment.
Just building on the sort of calm technology chat that we've been having, as industrial designers, we often see a push to digitize or completely automate tasks. What would be a good litmus test we can use when it's better to just sort of mechanize something or do it by hand as opposed to always automating or digitizing these sort of things?
I think it's such a rough thing to say one size fits all statements like everything should be automated or in the future all jobs will be gone. It's like, no, that's not, there isn't like, that's just not how the world or nature works. Like, but it is often a very truthy way of selling a lot of clicks on a page because people are like, oh no, the amygdala gets fired. It shouldn't be that way. I think it's more about you have a task that you're doing that's annoying. You can write a program that does that for you to free up your time. It's always a rolling automation cycle where there's something at the edge that's not automatable yet. There's something behind that you automated well, and it's pretty easy to maintain, like a thermostat, and that's it. And so this conveyor belt should happen where you're kind of one step ahead and looking into the future, not, and I think it's kind of like Tin Woodman, like the Tin Woodman from Wizard of Oz, didn't just become an industrial man all at once. He was a bad woodman and chopped off parts of his arms and stuff and then had to get them made out of tin, and eventually he was a tin. But that's a like a small conveyor belt of automation. I really like to go to industries that really understand what can be automated and what can't. And one of the most mature industries is the credit card fraud industry. So I'll go to a lot of fraud hacker conferences and things like that. And one of them in Las Vegas, the MCE conference, I believe, they just had a trade show floor. 30% was qualitative, human-based understanding of the credit card info came in. Is it incorrect or correct, right? And then there's the 70% machine, and then like a couple people in the corner that you would just call in case it didn't get caught by machine or the qualitative researchers. And I said, how does that work? And they said, it's always going to be like 70-30, a couple people. And those couple people are going to catch the new stuff, send it to the humans, and then those humans are going to automate it, like, or like send it over to automation, and it just goes like this in a rolling thing because we're not dealing with static systems. And so when people try to automate everything, it's not possible. It's great to have this flexible system of like, let's automate this piecemeal and then make sure it works well. And oftentimes I hear programmers being like, I'll just automate that. I'm like, yeah, but now you're maintaining a code repo that you don't like. Actually, the maintenance is costing more than just doing the thing. And so, yeah, they're not trained as engineers, like real engineers or industrial designers. And so you get this mess. And I'm like, oh. And they're like, I'm just going to quit and move on and like not leave anything well documented. And I don't mean to like be down on programmers that do this, but it's costing a lot more attention than necessary.
I mean, it's a good point because sometimes we have the inverse where something that's designed to reduce the amount of attention used can end up being negative. So like I think a good example would be the electronic parking brake. So I know that some cars, they either have a button or a rotary dial, which is probably the worst way of doing it, where you go from reverse drive to park. And there's often neutral in there. And I can remember at least several instances where people think they've put the car in park and engaged the parking brake, but it's actually neutral. I believe that's how there was an actor who was in Star Trek accidentally killed himself by shifting the car into what he thought was park, and it was actually neutral, or using a rotary dial instead of just having a lever like an older car where you pull the lever up, you have a very instant feedback of the parking brake is on because I can't pull the lever any further, instead of mixing these control interfaces with the gear shift. And as a result, he got out of his car, went to check his letterbox, and without realizing it, the car rolled on top of him. If I was to put my 10 cents in, is if you're going to put in a system that automates something that can cause someone's physical harm unintentionally, don't do it.
Yep,
Yeah,
completely. You've
and
just unlocked a new fear for me as well for my car.
that's true. That's why I always buy things about 10 years old. No, I do wait. I do wait for the third gen of most things. The first gen is to test on the population that has enough money to be first. The second gen has all the features you want, but none of the battery life. And then the third one has a good mix and doesn't try to innovate too much. It's kind of a blanket statement, but like I've seen it with a lot of things, and your car example is fantastic. Like example of like leverage old behaviors to work with new ones. Don't ever, 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 with something that's always been that lever, use it for anything else. It should always be that thing because that's your life or death thing. And you want to make an indicator button, you want to make a Bauhaus style thing, you want to make a gradient fill thing for whatever you want, sure, do it. But don't change that thing. That's what we're used to. And because the car is a calm technology and that is a pass-through, and we have memorized those things so that they can be in this like simple system that when we drive, we just automatically do it. 30 years of automatic memory is always going to override any new behavior and say, yeah, you can kill yourself if some car manufacturer does that and doesn't test it properly. And that was my big issue when I went to this mobile festival or whatever, sat in a new fancy car, and then pointed at the interface and said, you can't use this while you're driving. No one tested this on the road, did they? And the chairman of the board of the company was sitting next to me and said, hi, you're right. We didn't test it. I'm the chairman of the board. Nice to meet you.
Great
So,
way to introduce yourself is with criticism, right?
Yeah.
yeah. And I said, you got to fix this. He said, we will. And I said, see ya. Like, I love your car company, but like, this is unacceptable. And I was just like, I'm not going to apologize because, and it's got to be done in a way that isn't like demeaning. You just have to tell the truth sometimes. And most people aren't as crazy, insane about my weird niche, right? Like caring about this stuff.
Well, I think it's important definitely to hold on to your principles, and like it's a hard thing to do as a designer sometimes, especially when you're working with teams or like very difficult clients. But one question we have is, what's the biggest challenge teams face in trying to implement principles of calm technology into their products?
I've had a lot of feedback on this, and which is good. And I'm now taking all that feedback from the last 8 years and I'm putting it forward, right? So a lot of it is, hi, I'm new to this company. I want them to do calm tech. They need a business case for calm. So I need to show them that by investing a couple years in a thing or getting a calm tech certification, that this is going to be more valuable for them. 2 is that the way that people can do it is they just buy a copy of the book and like put it on an executive's desk. And because it's such a thin book, people usually just read it. Like it's not that hard to read, thankfully. Some people are mad because they think it's about how you could be better with technology. It's not my domain to write that book. Like several people have worked on that. It's going to be outdated really fast. So it's like, how do you get people to care, show the talk to somebody, show the book to somebody? They also need to be ready for it. So I don't want anybody that doesn't care about this or isn't ready to care, which is why I don't try really hard to sell this to people. They just need to come to me. I kind of like that idea, kind of like the Bruce Mao ideology. I don't think he goes out and says like, you must have what I do, but he gets like really weird requests from like governments and stuff and cities. They're like, we need to rebrand our city. And he's like, is this possible? And he's a really strong person. He's like a huge inspiration for me because he says, okay. And he figures it out, even if it's like political or weird. There's some politics involved with this in that there's some people that are just going to be weird. And so you just can't sell it until people are ready. And I think my process needs to be just as calm as the principles when implemented make people feel, or I'm just being a dork. It's not going to work if it's not self-similar all the way down.
Do you think the biggest critics of this might be like the marketing teams, or like where do you often see the criticism?
The criticism I've seen is mostly just wow, you really care about buttons.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
If I was to criticize it, I'd say it's not sexy, so you need to sex it up. And this is literally the same criticism I got when I was in the field trying to implement stuff like this.
Was when people want things to jump out and want things
Yeah.
to be all over the place, like
Well,
Yeah.
my solution was to add dollar signs to it. So I would literally go like, this is the cost of a failure according to our actuary. This is how much we expect to reduce the prevalence of this failure, which might be someone presses a wrong button and it costs the company $36 per minute per shutdown, and a shutdown lasts 54 minutes. And that's how I would get it across, and that worked great in my field. I don't know if that would work for everyone else, but I turned it into dollary dues, and how much dollary dues we're saving.
That's really
people,
cool.
yeah, money talks.
I feel like, yeah, I've been a little slow with this because I feel like unsexy things are capable of lasting forever, and sexy stuff can get fashionable fast and then it'll lose its momentum. So the worst thing that would be is if this were sexy. I love the dollar sign.
to quote Karl Marx, nothing's sexier than the dollar.
It's great. This is very good.
I mean, maybe jumping ship a bit, we talk about things like sensory uses of different senses in the periphery of our senses. How can we use, shall we say, calm design principles to cater to diverse sensory needs? So let's say, for example, I'm a user and I'm colorblind or I have tinnitus. What kind of process should we use to implement a calmness to our designs for these users?
So Microsoft did a really great set of research that has done it better than I could have ever done it with a great set of people. It's really important to note that some people have done this already, and Microsoft has an inclusive design framework, which with a set of cards that you can actually like shuffle and present these scenarios to see if your text works. From the calm tech perspective, it would be as simple as change the notification style according to what you need. So according to Microsoft research, 21 million people in the United States alone have some sort of temporary, permanent, or situational disability. One example would be, I want to do something that requires two hands, but I have a baby in one hand, and I can't do it. So that's a situational non-use of my right hand. My arm is broken. I don't have use of that temporarily. Permanent. I don't have a right arm. And so in each of these cases, you can play through scenarios on how you could still support people. It's really important to think through these and actually work with the people who have designed these frameworks and go through those aspects and then just look through the lens of calm tech. Does this context and this notification style support someone's attention for this particular situation? And then once you do that, you can design better. It's just sometimes people forget about all the different ways people can experience a product. I really like the idea of designing for human universals instead of all these different like little niches. Like people need to feel a sense of belonging. They need to feel a sense of safety. A bridge designer is going to design with all of that.
Yeah, no one wants a product to remind them that they're disabled.
No, I really like Amy Mullins. Amy Mullins is someone who had to have her legs amputated when she was pretty young, or maybe at birth. And she's like, I love not having legs because I get all these cool legs. Like she has like Barbie legs that you can walk in high heels with. She has clear legs that are cool looking, like made of glass. She has cheetah legs where she can beat land speed records and stuff like that.
So your principles include technology should work even when it fails. Could you expand on what that means a little bit? And are there any current technologies that embody this principle?
Absolutely. It's really important to think about the escalator. When that fails, it turns into stairs, which is my favorite example. Another example is bridges, engineering marvels. There's a crazy set of wind, there's heat that changes, and the bridge adapts to that. So it doesn't have a crazy intense failure state. All of those dynamic conditions have been tested so that unless it's like a freaking hurricane, it's not going to fail. And so in a way, it's failing in all these really graceful ways. So in products, the petnet.io feeder should have had a graceful decay in that there's a system that you can assign from your phone. If that goes away, it's going to default to several feeding mechanisms that is memorized on the device. It's going to have a 7-day battery backup. So if your pet's caught in a hurricane, it will still feed your pet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to have another system that if the primary hopper gets stuck, food chunks get stuck in it, it's going to have a little mechanism that gets the thing unstuck and has some understanding of that. And there's a secondary system that dispenses food as a backup, kind of like a spare tire. There's all these different things you can do. A fourth one, I just wrote an article on this, that you could have happen is you have a local national chain of pet network feeders that in an absolute emergency, it notices that it hasn't fed your pet and you're out of the country. A trusted pet sitter will come over and be able to enter into your house with a smart lock and ensure that your pet has been fed. And you can sign up for that as a special bonus, right? So we're just thinking through all the failure states. My other favorite way of explaining this is when Zappos first started selling shoes online, everybody thought they were crazy. They said, what happens with regular shoes online? They get returned a lot. What happens in a regular store? You try on the shoe and you just return it to the box. You don't need to return it to the store. So they said, in the absence of a really great store experience, we need to make the experience of failure delightful. It should be fun to return the shoes, fun to buy the shoes. And so they made it really awesome to buy and fail at buying shoes so much that they were successful and then they got bought by Amazon. So this is a good example of take the experience of failure, assume it's going to work, make it awesome, and you'll do just fine.
And to fail.
Yeah.
So your work in calm technology also seems to emphasize a shift from like chronos or chronological time to kairos, which is this idea of human or qualitative aspects of time, those positive human experiences as opposed to driving to work. Could you explain this concept a little further, and how do you see calm technology facilitating this transition?
Sure. So Chronos and Kairos time are just interesting concepts I came across from the Greeks. The idea of Chronos time being like this industrial time where, let's just say today, you wake up at 9, you have a meeting at 10, there's an agenda, the meeting's over at 11, you might eat at the same time every day. It's very industrial. It's very useful if you have a factory and you need to make sure this stuff happens on time. But when you go home, you want to have human time. The things that you remember on your deathbed are not the time that you updated the Apple TV. The things that you remember on your deathbed are holding hands with your loved one for the first time, watching a baby's first steps, watching a sunset, like that special trip that you took.
I'm assuming this from first-hand experience, right?
No, not at all. This is what they tell you when they die. Yeah. On my deathbed 10 years ago, I experienced these things. Yeah, it's like this special thing of, wait, how do we have this junk, bureaucratic mess that we have to deal with in our everyday lives be less, so that we can leave more moments to like play with our kids and be present and decide what we want to do? How do we have a choice? It's really about choice. It doesn't mean we should all be calm. Oh my gosh, it should mean that we have a choice on how to spend our time, where to spend it, and how. And when we buy something made by somebody else, there should be a sense of care that it just works.
This does remind me of this time when I was interviewing at a Fortune 500, and they said, what's your favorite principle that you would like to see implemented in our user experience? And I, by that time, knew I wasn't going to get the job. I looked around the room and realized I was the odd one out. And I basically went, what? Bugger it. I told them that they asked about a fun fact, and everyone didn't give a fun fact. And I told them I was terrified of ducks until I was 16. Not true. I was terrified of ducks until I was 12. But I told them my favorite user experience principle that we need to see more of is time travel. And they were like, what? What's up with that? And I said, look, do you know how the human mind records memories? The human mind does not record the same thing over and over again. It only records differences. And this is why when you go on holiday for 2 weeks, it feels like a long period of time, both in the moment and in reflection. And yet, if you do the same job over and over again, going into the office, you may not remember massive chunks of it. And this is why people think that as you get older, time speeds up. It doesn't, but but as you get older, your life may become more repetitive.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and this is something that I'm hoping to see this is going to be weighted into certain design decisions in future products where we try and change things a little bit every now and then so that we can occupy the human mind a bit more and like have more engaged experiences.
What do we use our devices for half the time? To review pictures from our past and to relive those memories. Why do we read books except for time travel? See other people's perspectives. It's great. I mean, it's really important to also think about different ways of experiencing time so that we can actually like have more dialogues about things. So nothing is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know what company that was, but if I were the hiring manager, I would have been like, yeah, let's talk to this guy.
Oh no, they'd made the decision before I even walked in the office.
Well, they're lost, arguing, right?
Maybe.
With that point on time travel and removing repetitiveness or reducing repetitiveness to take in more memories and experiences, do you think that would be in position to calming technology? Wouldn't you say like more automation, repetitiveness, and blankness would be more in line with the calming? Or would you say that mixing it up, new things would be kind of in line?
It really depends on the situation. So if you have an alert in a hospital, and a new nurse catches that alert in 9 minutes, and a veteran nurse of a couple of years catches that alert in 40 minutes, you do need to introduce some slight variation into the alerts so that people don't just ignore it. That repetition, when it's done well, means that you just have the same action that you do and you get into a state of flow. When the state of flow is too good and you actually need to be arrested out of it, then you need to introduce a little bit of noise to get people to not just get used to it. So it's really about wielding that flow and that system 1, that system 2 type interaction in the right place at the right time with the right context to make sure that it's supporting what you need people to do. And that is a very fine line.
Yeah, so of course there's balance. You don't want it to be too repetitive, but at the same time, like, yeah, you need a bit of automation.
You don't want the novelty all the time. To
Yeah.
close out, Amber, what would you say is the next frontier for calm technology and calm design?
I think the next frontier for calm technology and calm design is to make it possible to design more calm products and to get people used to the idea that stuff could be better, that it doesn't have to be this way, it doesn't have to suck, that the technology that we experience is going to keep happening, but we can demand better experiences from...
We should expect better experiences?
We should not be like Karens and expect better experiences. We should just know, like a breath of fresh air, by touching something new and experiencing something new, that it could be possible for things to be better. And it should feel like the first time as a third grader you learn about a black hole or a solar system. It should feel childlike, new, and refreshing. And that's really important for me to try. This is the big goal for me in creating the Calm Technology Foundation. Being announced here, nowhere else. You get the first look at it. The Calm Tech Foundation exists to redefine society's expectations around human technology interactions, and then provide a new standard for designing technologies that improve human life. So if the foundation can help do that, then there's going to be not only more of a demand for calm tech products, but like a demand to be treated seriously as a human being. That we're the ones that are automated. We're the ones doing the automation task. We're the robots. When we talk about robot rights, we're actually talking about human rights. So how do you make sure that we have our humanness back so that we can actually be and live lives that aren't 2.5 dimensions? I think that's really, really important.
How do we use technology to become more human than we already are?
How do we use design to re-engage a really robust way of creating tools that work alongside us and forget the idea of this dumb thing we call technology that has to be so shiny and awesome? Technology is for movies. Tools are for us. Let's have a good time. Make sure we don't tromp on anyone's parade. but let's also allow people to have a good time while they watch a film and not notice the stupid remote control telling them that the Bluetooth isn't pairing or the battery is low. It's in my ears, which I need to download a software app, turn this off. I need to tell my Bose headphones to not tell me in my ear to you that battery is low, please charge.
So basically, how to design calm tools with Amber Case.
Yeah, let's make things more polite. Or as Doug Rushkoff would say, sit, Siri.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amber.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great to be here.
We've all enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience will too. For those listening in, don't forget to check the show notes for links to anything we've mentioned, where to follow the show, and where to find Amber, and how to get in contact with us. And until next time, you've been listening to Redacted.
Redacted.
With Amber Case.
The number you have dialed has not been recognized. Please check and try again. The number you have dialed has been
Redacted.